Now let's look at the paintbrush. I have opened Paragliders. I press Ctrl 1 to see the image at its real size. I can navigate through the image by pressing the middle mouse button. Before I use the paintbrush, I will create a new empty layer, so I am not painting on the image, but on a separate layer. Now I will click on the paintbrush tool in the toolbar. I can also press B to select the paintbrush. To change the size of the brush, I press the Alt key and scroll forwards to increase the size, and scroll backwards to decrease the size. In the tool options, I can see the size of my brush changing. I will set the size to 60. The color I will be painting with comes from the foreground color, which by default is set to black. Behind the foreground color is the background color, which is by default set to white. You can turn them around by clicking on this little arrow, or by pressing the X key. I will now draw a stroke by dragging. I can also draw straight lines. I click, then I press Shift, and I click somewhere else. The line is a preview to help you see where the stroke will be. To get a straight horizontal or vertical line, press Shift plus Ctrl. When we look in the tool options, we see a small thumbnail. This is the brush I am currently using. If you click on it, you will get an overview of the brushes you have. I have added some extra brushes. At the end of this lecture, I will show you how and where you can download free creative brushes. Let's select another brush. I had a soft brush, so now let's select a hard brush. Notice that if I hold my mouse above the thumbnail, when I scroll, I can also select another brush. Another way to select a brush is by going to the Brushes panel. The advantage of the Brushes panel is that we can make the panel larger. Let's also make the preview of the brushes bigger. I click on the Configure this tab arrow, go to Preview Size and select Extra Large. The small plus sign at the bottom right of a brush icon indicates that the actual brush is larger than the preview. To get a bigger preview, like in the Layers panel, click on the icon and hold the mouse down. A brush with a red rectangle is called an animated brush. An animated brush will show different brushes while you paint, so it has more variation than a standard brush. A brush with a blue triangle has been created with GIMP's own brush editor. Let's have a look at the brush editor. If I double-click on a brush with a blue triangle, the brush editor opens. I can now see the settings of the brush. Because GIMP's default brushes are locked, I can't change the brush. So I will make some brushes of my own that I can tweak when I need to. At the bottom of the Brushes panel, I click on the Create a New Brush button. I go to the brush editor and make the brush bigger so we can clearly see what happens. Under Preview, you can choose between 3 basic shapes: circle, square and diamond. I will start with the diamond and click on it. In the Spikes bar, by scrolling with my scroll wheel, I will make about 10 spikes. If I now increase the aspect ratio, I create a star. If I click on the circle button, I will get rounded corners, resulting in a flower shape. If I click on the square, I get straight lines. I will select the diamond again. Now I will lower the hardness, which makes the brush softer. Let's test the brush. I change the color to white by clicking on the double arrow or by pressing the X key. I will increase the size of my brush by Alt scrolling and click to see how my brush looks like. It looks like a sun effect. I choose circle again, remove spikes and set hardness to 100%. I can flatten the circle with aspect ratio and rotate the circle with angle. Notice that with finished brushes, aspect ratio and angle can also be adjusted. However, these changes made in the tool options will not be saved and are only temporarily. Spacing determines how often the brush repeats when you draw. With a spacing of 100%, the brush will repeat itself after its own length. I can clear the content of my layer by pressing the delete key. I will draw with the circle. To draw fluid lines, you need a spacing of 10%. Spacing is also adjustable at a later point at the bottom of the brushes panel. As in the tool options, these settings will not be saved. In the brushes panel, you can also delete a brush. A selected brush has a black border around it. At the bottom, I click on the Delete this brush icon. I will now quickly make my own set of soft round brushes. I click on the Create a new brush button. I start by giving my brush a name. On top, I select the text Untitled. I type brush and then press the spacebar once to put an extra white space behind my text. I press Ctrl A and Ctrl C to copy the text, so I don't have to retype it again for my other brushes. I click behind my text so I see a blinking cursor again, and I add 25%. I hold my mouse above the hardness bar and scroll backwards to 25%. I press the Tab key 3 times and type 10 to set the spacing to 10%. My first brush is ready. I click again on the Create a new brush button. I double click at the top on the text Untitled and press Ctrl V to paste the copy text. I type 90%. I click once in the hardness bar around 90%. Then I scroll with my scroll wheel to 0.90. I press Tab 3 times and type 10. My second brush is ready. I click again on the Create a new brush button. I double click on the text Untitled and press Ctrl V. I type 0%. I drag hardness all the way to the left to 0%. I press Tab 3 times and type 10. And for the last brush, I create a new brush. I select Untitled and press Ctrl V. I type 100%. I drag hardness all the way to the right, to 100%. I press Tab 3 times and type 10. My brushes are finished. In the Brushes panel, I can see my 4 brushes. I would like to set one of these brushes as my default brush. This means that every time I start up GIMP, when I select the paintbrush, this will be the brush that's selected. I will select the soft brush with 0% hardness. At the top left of the preview window, I can see its name. Now I go to Edit, Preferences, Input Devices. As mentioned in the Configuring User Interface lecture, under Input Devices, you specify the default tool, color and brush type. I have chosen a new brush, which is selected here. Now I will select the Move tool, because otherwise GIMP will start up with the brush selected. And I will also click at the small black and white icon at the left of the fore and background color to set them to their default black and white. Now I click on Save Input Devices Settings Now. Let's have a closer look at the tool options.